Hello everyone, welcome to Canteen Cup. My name is Scott and today we are talking about amateur radio or ham radio and what you need to do to get licensed, and then a basic rundown of equipment you will need to operate on HF radio. Now the reason why I'm talking about HF radio is I have been asked to talk about the beginnings of long-range communication. And really to do that, you need HF radio. And this is from a preparedness point of view, one prepper group talking to another prepper group. They may be 50 miles away, they may be 100 miles away, they may be 200 miles away or more. And in order to contact them when normal communication systems are down, HF radio is probably the most viable way to go. Excuse me a second. There, that'll take care of that. So we're going to talk about getting a license. Now, in amateur radio is a license is required by the FCC. Currently, the license is free. However, there is often an administrative charge for the test, somewhere, I'm going to say somewhere in the neighborhood of $16. And in today's world, it's even easier because they're doing some of this testing online. You can also take a test at your local amateur radio club, and they can help you get licensed or find out what you need to do to get licensed. Oftentimes they offer a class. However, in my experience, a class isn't necessary because the test in today's world is not that hard. They change the question pool about every 5 years, and so I don't know. I don't think you should need to really go to a class unless you really have trouble with some of the technology. In today's world, the FCC has 3 classes of license. They have a technician's class, they have a general class, and they have an extra class. Now, if you had a license a long time ago and you still have a copy of that license, you may not need to take the test. Also, there are still a lot of what they call advanced class amateur radio operators out there whose licenses are still good and they can maintain that class as being grandfathered in. But for today's world, in today's purpose, you need to get at least a general class license that will give you the majority of HF privileges available and probably all you need to perform emergency communications. Now, in order to do that, you have to take the technician's class first, and then you can take the general class. Now, how do you study for the test? Well, that's relatively easy. You can buy a book, and I'll give you some links either from Gordon West or the ARRL, which is the American Radio Relay League, and you can buy their study guide. Now, because of the Freedom of Information Act, you get all of the questions for each class, and you get all of the answers, all of them. So when you study for your test, what I want you to do is go through the book first with a highlighter and get all the correct answers. They have a key usually in the back of the book, or sometimes it's right there. But take a highlighter and highlight only the correct answer for each question. And there's like 400 of them. And for the technician's class, you're only going to be tested on 35 questions from the different categories. They have about, half a dozen to a dozen different categories. And all you do is you go through the book and you study the question and you study only the correct answer. Just ignore the other answers. Or in fact, you can even take a magic marker and X them out. But only study the question and only study the correct answer. And what that will do for you is that will, when you go to take the test and you read the question and you start looking at the answer, only one of those answers will look familiar, and that'll be the correct one because that's the one you studied. And so you're going to have to buy 2 books, or if you are on Amazon and you have Kindle books, you can get some free copies out there. Just go on Amazon and just put in General Class License Book, and they'll give you some. I think the books, if you buy the paperback or the hardback copies, are somewhere around between $19 and $30, depending on which version you get. Or if you have a Kindle, you can get the Kindle version. There's a couple out there that are free. So get them and study them, and then pass your test. But it's imperative that if you are going to be the communications chief or the communications sergeant for your group, you need to have this license, because you need to practice your skill set and you need to use your equipment. So that's all it is. It's pretty easy. Get the book, study the questions, study the correct answer, and then find out where you can take a test. Like I said, because of the COVID, they're doing some of the testing online, or you can go to your local amateur radio club and find that. If you don't know where to find that, ARRL.org, and I'll post that link where you can find the club and get tested. And then once you pass your test, you'll get a call sign. And getting the license, getting your call sign doesn't make you a, we'll call it a professional amateur radio operator. It's kind of like they've given you training wheels, and now you have to go out and practice, because it's a different world, it's a different language, it's a different form of communication, and the only way you'll get good at it is through practice. Now, that being said, I talked about equipment, and I know we all like equipment, so I'm going to show you what a basic HF radio setup looks like. This is my portable unit. This is when I go to the field, this is what I take with me. If someone asks me what radio do I recommend, this is the radio I recommend. So there it goes. So I'm going to switch around now and kind of show you what the setup looks like. All right. So here we are. I have an HF radio, a tuner, a power supply, and I have a computer hooked up, and we'll talk about that so that I can talk on a digital mode, because as a communicator for your group, you should be able to talk on both voice using a microphone and then digitally by typing in the keyboard. Now, why it's important is because you can transfer more information faster and further digitally than you can with voice. However, you have to have a computer to go with you. So, let's go back over here. The radio that I recommend that everybody use, and again, your mileage may vary, but my go-to radio, when someone asks me what radio should I get, it is always the Icom IC-7300. This is a great radio. It's got a great receiver. It's got a lot of features. It's fairly simple to use. It's got touch screens, so you can adjust your power and whatever. It's got a waterfall that kind of tells you where signals are, and we'll look at that in a little bit. But in general, for a portable or any, for a starter HF radio, this is a hard deal to beat. They're somewhere around $1,000, $1,200. Yeah, you can get cheaper radios, but for the most bang for the buck, this is it. And there's a couple reasons why, and we'll go through that here in a little bit. I'm going to give us a little background music. All right, what you're hearing are digital signals. And what's cool about that is you can't understand what they're saying, but your computer can decode it, and other people with computers that are hooked up to their radios can decode it, but the general public cannot. So it's kind of semi-secure. So it's a good thing to know if you want to pass some information, you know, out there that you don't want everybody to know, but yet you can't be totally secure. So this is the radio I recommend, an IC-7300. Now on top of this is a tuner. This is a LDG Z11 Pro. It's an antenna tuner. I've had this one for probably 10 or 15 years. It's a great tuner. The nice part about this tuner is it hooks directly up to the radio, including the power and the ability to tune. Now what this tuner does is it matches the impedance between your antenna and your radio so that you can put out a maximum amount of power. And the way you do that, and again, this is one of the nice parts about this radio with this tuner, is there's a little button over here that says tuner, and I just push that button. Okay, I may have to do that again. There. That little green light says I got a 1.5 to 1 match, and that's really good. You know, 1 to 1 is the best, but 1.5 to 1 is good. So, but I do not need a separate power supply for this. I just plug it into the back of my radio, and boom, Bob's your uncle. Now sitting next to this is a power supply. This is an Astron 30-amp power supply, and it's a switching power supply, so you can see it's nice and small. It's about 4 inches tall and not much bigger than my hand, side to side. This requires 110 volt power. You have to plug it into a wall wart, or you can plug it into a generator. And if you plug it into a generator, make sure you get an inverter style generator, not a Home Depot generator, because it'll ruin your power supply and your radio. You can also plug this radio into a 12 volt car battery, and that's a whole nother discussion, but just suffice to say that you can. I also recommend that you get this little guide here. It's called the Nifty mini manual. It's a laminated paper, and it's a condensed version of the radio's manual. The manual you get with the radio is actually pretty big, and this is more like a reminder to help you with some things you don't use very often. Now, I talked about a digital mode, and that's what this is. You look at this right here. That's what it looks like when somebody's transmitting a digital mode, a visual representation. And I'll get over here to the speaker, and that's what it sounds like. So, in order to transmit on a digital mode, you need a computer. You don't need a fancy computer. Most of the software, this is FLDIGI, runs on a fairly low powered computer. Some of those cheap ones you buy from Walmart, just make sure it has Windows 10. And it has the real version of Windows 10, not the, I think the old, called the ARM versions, but a real version of Windows 10. This particular program will also run on Linux, I believe. So you got to have a computer to make the digital modes, and then it takes a little bit of learning to get this, but once you get it set up, it's pretty easy. Now I wanted to show you something, and that is the only thing that hooks up to my radio. It's just one USB connection, and a lot of other radios require more than one, but this requires one. It controls the radio. It takes the audio in, the audio out. I can, if you look up here, I've got 7.071.62. I've got the same thing over here. If I turn the radio a little bit, see how that turns with it? So that the radio is there and there, and it is the same. Now I can go over here, and did you hear that? So my computer is also tuning the radio, and that's important to have your radio being able to tune your computer, tune the radio, and the radio tune the computer. It keeps everything in sync. So this is it. The only other thing I want to talk about is an antenna. Turn this down a little bit now. We've had enough fun with that. Is the antenna. And the antenna, really what you need is a dipole. And I'll include a link on where to find a dipole or even how to build one. They're pretty easy. And then you'll need coaxial cable to get on out. So this is just a primer or a primer, however you all want to pronounce it. But this is the basics to get you on HF, to get you started. This radio puts out 100 watts. It can go down to 5 or 10. And like I said, I've had this radio for probably 5 or 6 years. It is my go-to radio. That when I take a radio out of the house, this is the one I take. It's a great radio. So that's all I got. And again, it's just to get you started. This is the basics to get you to where you need to be. So everybody, stay safe and stay secure, and I hope to hear you out there.